Question 1. The control framework reveals that an applicant for a Utah driver's license has presented documents that appear to have minor discrepancies and possible signs of alteration. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Utah DMV licensing agent to ensure regulatory compliance and maintain the integrity of the licensing process? Option A. Carefully examine the documents for any signs of alteration or inconsistency. Cross-reference them with Utah DMV requirements for proof of identity and residency, and if suspicion persists, request additional verifiable documentation as per Utah law. Option B. Issue the driver's license immediately to avoid delaying the applicant, assuming the discrepancies are minor and unintentional. Option C. Proceed with issuing the license while making a note of the discrepancies, assuming the applicant is being truthful and the alterations are insignificant. Option D. Politely inform the applicant that their documents are unacceptable and deny the license application without further investigation or opportunity for correction. Correct answer is A. Carefully examine the documents for any signs of alteration or inconsistency. Cross-reference them with Utah DMV requirements for proof of identity and residency, and if suspicion persists, request additional verifiable documentation as per Utah law. Explanation. The control framework reveals a scenario where an applicant for a Utah driver's license presents documentation that appears to be altered. This situation is professionally challenging because it requires the licensing agent to balance the need to uphold the integrity of the licensing process with the potential for error or misinterpretation of the documents. Careful judgment is required to avoid both wrongly denying a legitimate applicant and wrongly issuing a license to an unqualified or fraudulent individual. The best professional practice involves carefully examining the provided documentation for any signs of alteration or inconsistency, cross-referencing it with established Utah Division of Motor Vehicles, DMV, requirements for proof of identity and residency, and if suspicion remains, politely but firmly requesting additional, verifiable documentation as outlined in Utah Code Annotated UCA, Title 41, Chapter 2, specifically concerning drivers, license issuance, and requirements. This approach directly adheres to the regulatory mandate of ensuring applicants meet all legal qualifications before a license is issued, prioritizing public safety and the integrity of the licensing system. It also provides the applicant with a clear path to satisfy the requirements. Presenting the applicant with a license without further verification, despite visible signs of potential alteration, is a significant regulatory failure. This bypasses the fundamental requirement to confirm the authenticity of submitted documents, thereby undermining the security and reliability of the Utah driver's licensing system, as mandated by UCA 41-2-201. Challenging the applicant aggressively and immediately accusing them of fraud without a thorough, objective review of the documents and a request for clarification or additional proof is also professionally unacceptable. While diligence is necessary, an accusatory approach can violate principles of fairness and due process, potentially alienating applicants and creating unnecessary conflict, without first exhausting the established procedures for document verification. Assuming the documents are legitimate and proceeding with the license issuance without any further scrutiny, even with visible discrepancies, is a failure to exercise due diligence as required by the Utah DMV's operational guidelines and UCA 41-2-201. This approach prioritizes expediency over regulatory compliance and public safety. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with objective observation of the presented evidence, followed by a systematic comparison against established regulatory requirements. If discrepancies arise, the next step is to seek clarification or request supplementary documentation according to established procedures. This process ensures fairness to the applicant while upholding the integrity and safety standards of the licensing authority. Question 2. The control framework reveals that an applicant for a Utah driver's license has presented a birth certificate that appears to have been photocopied multiple times, resulting in a slight blurring of some text. The applicant also provided a utility bill with their name and address. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Utah DMV licensing agent? Option A. Immediately reject the birth certificate as it is clearly not an original document and therefore invalid for licensing purposes. Option B. Carefully examine the birth certificate for any signs of tampering, compare the information with the utility bill and other required documentation, and if discrepancies or significant alterations are noted, follow established DMV procedures for document verification or escalation. Option C. Accept the birth certificate and utility bill, but immediately file a report with law enforcement alleging document fraud without conducting further internal verification. Option D. Accept the birth certificate and utility bill without further inspection, assuming the applicant is providing legitimate documentation. The correct answer is B. Carefully examine the birth certificate for any signs of tampering, compare the information with the utility bill and other required documentation, and if discrepancies or significant alterations are noted, follow established DMV procedures for document verification or escalation. Explanation. The control framework reveals a scenario where an applicant for a Utah driver's license presents documentation that appears to be altered. This situation is professionally challenging because it requires the licensing agent to balance the need to uphold the integrity of the licensing process with the potential for misinterpreting genuine documents or unfairly denying an applicant their rights. Careful judgment is required to avoid both facilitating fraud and unjustly penalizing an honest applicant. Correct approach involves meticulously comparing the presented documentation against established Utah Division of Motor Vehicles, DMV, requirements for proof of identity and residency. This includes scrutinizing for signs of alteration, verifying the authenticity of the issuing authority, and cross-referencing information with available databases if permitted and necessary. Utah law, specifically the Utah Code Title 41, Chapter 2, Motor Vehicle Act, outlines the requirements for obtaining a driver's license, including the types of documentation acceptable as proof of identity, legal presence, and Utah residency. The DMV's administrative rules further detail the standards for document examination. Adhering to these established procedures ensures compliance with state law and DMV policy, thereby safeguarding the integrity of the licensing system and preventing the issuance of licenses to individuals who do not meet the legal requirements. An incorrect approach involves immediately rejecting the documentation based solely on a subjective feeling of suspicion, without conducting a thorough verification process. This fails to comply with the procedural fairness expected in administrative processes and could violate an applicant's right to due process if their documentation is valid but appears unusual. Another incorrect approach is to accept the documentation without any further scrutiny, even if there are clear indicators of tampering. This directly undermines the regulatory framework designed to prevent fraudulent applications and could lead to the issuance of a license to an unqualified individual, violating Utah Code and DMV regulations. Finally, accepting the documentation after a cursory glance, and then reporting the applicant for potential fraud without a proper internal review process is also professionally unsound. While reporting suspicious activity is important, it must be preceded by a diligent effort to verify the documents according to established procedures. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to established procedures and regulations. This involves a systematic review of all presented documents against the official requirements, utilizing available verification tools, and consulting with supervisors or designated personnel if uncertainty persists. The goal is to make an informed decision based on objective evidence and regulatory compliance, rather than subjective impressions or assumptions. Question 3. The control framework reveals that when processing a driver's license application in Utah, an examiner encounters a situation where the applicant presents a birth certificate and a social security card that appear legitimate, but the applicant's address on the birth certificate is slightly different from the address listed on the social security card. What is the most appropriate course of action for the examiner to take according to Utah's regulatory framework for driver's licenses? Option A. Flag the discrepancy and initiate the secondary verification process as outlined by the Utah Division of Motor Vehicles to confirm the applicant's identity and address. Option B. Advise the applicant to obtain corrected documents before returning to reapply, without further investigation into the current documents. Option C. Accept the documents as presented, assuming the minor address difference is a clerical error, and proceed with issuing the license. Option D. Immediately deny the application due to the conflicting address information, citing insufficient proof of residency. The correct answer is A. Flag the discrepancy and initiate the secondary verification process as outlined by the Utah Division of Motor Vehicles to confirm the applicant's identity and address. Explanation. The control framework reveals that navigating the Utah Driver License Act and associated administrative rules requires strict adherence to established procedures for license application and verification. This scenario is professionally challenging because the applicant presents documentation that, while seemingly valid, raises a subtle but critical discrepancy that could lead to an improperly issued license if not thoroughly investigated. The DMV examiner must balance efficient service with the imperative to prevent fraud and ensure public safety by issuing licenses only to qualified individuals who have met all legal requirements. The correct approach involves meticulously comparing all provided documentation against established Utah DMV verification protocols and cross-referencing information where discrepancies are noted. This method is correct because it directly aligns with the Utah Driver License Act's mandate for verifying applicant identity and eligibility. Specifically, Utah Administrative Rule R 909-1-502 outlines the requirements for proof of identity and lawful presence, emphasizing the need for original documents and the examiner's responsibility to ensure authenticity. By flagging the discrepancy and initiating the established secondary verification process, the examiner upholds the integrity of the licensing system and prevents potential violations of the Act. An incorrect approach would be to accept the documentation at face value, despite the observed discrepancy. This fails to meet the professional standard of due diligence mandated by the Utah Driver License Act, which requires examiners to be vigilant in verifying applicant information. Issuing a license based on potentially compromised documentation could lead to violations of lawful presence requirements and compromise public safety. Another incorrect approach would be to immediately deny the application without attempting further verification. While caution is necessary, the Utah Driver License Act and its administrative rules provide for secondary verification processes when initial documentation raises questions. Premature denial without exhausting these established procedures is not in line with the regulatory framework's intent to provide a fair and thorough process. A further incorrect approach would be to dismiss the discrepancy as minor and proceed with issuing the license. This demonstrates a lack of understanding of the critical importance of accurate documentation in the licensing process. Even seemingly small inconsistencies can be indicators of more significant issues, and overlooking them undermines the entire purpose of the verification process as outlined in Utah law. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes thoroughness and adherence to established protocols. This involves 1. Meticulously reviewing all submitted documentation against legal requirements. 2. Identifying any discrepancies or potential red flags. 3. Consulting relevant statutes and administrative rules for guidance on handling such issues. 4. Initiating appropriate secondary verification procedures as outlined by the Utah DMV. And 5. Making a final determination only after all verification steps have been completed and the applicant's eligibility is unequivocally confirmed. Question 4. The monitoring system demonstrates an anomaly in the processing of a recent vehicle sales registration paperwork at a Utah dealership, specifically an incorrect VIN being entered into the state's reporting portal. What is the most appropriate immediate action for the dealership employee who discovers this error? Option A. Immediately report the discrepancy to their direct supervisor or the dealership's designated compliance officer for further investigation and correction according to dealership policy and Utah DMV regulations. Option B. Inform the customer that the incorrect VIN was entered and instruct them to contact the Utah DMV directly to rectify the issue. Option C. Attempt to correct the VIN in the state's reporting portal directly without informing any supervisor, assuming the correction will be automatically validated. Option D. Overlook the VIN discrepancy, attributing it to a minor data entry error that will likely be caught during a future audit or reconciliation process. The correct answer is A. Immediately report the discrepancy to their direct supervisor or the dealership's designated compliance officer for further investigation and correction according to dealership policy and Utah DMV regulations. Explanation. The monitoring system demonstrates a potential lapse in regulatory compliance concerning the proper handling and reporting of vehicle registration information within Utah. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires immediate and accurate identification of a deviation from established procedures, balancing the need for efficiency with the imperative of legal adherence. A failure to correctly address such a situation could lead to significant penalties for the dealership and compromise the integrity of the state's vehicle registration system. The best approach involves immediately escalating the discovered discrepancy to the designated supervisor or compliance officer within the dealership. This is correct because Utah law, specifically the Utah Motor Vehicle Act and associated administrative rules, mandates accurate and timely reporting of all vehicle sales and registration information to the Utah Division of Motor Vehicles, DMV. By promptly informing a supervisor, the dealership initiates the internal process for investigation and correction, ensuring that the issue is addressed according to established protocols and legal requirements. This proactive step demonstrates a commitment to regulatory compliance and minimizes the risk of further violations or penalties. An incorrect approach would be to ignore the discrepancy, assuming it is a minor error that will resolve itself or can be corrected later without formal reporting. This fails to acknowledge the legal obligation to report all registration-related information accurately and promptly, potentially leading to violations of the Utah Motor Vehicle Act. Another incorrect approach is to attempt to correct the error internally without notifying any supervisory personnel or the DMV, especially if the correction involves altering official records. This bypasses established compliance procedures and could be construed as an attempt to conceal a reporting error, which is a serious regulatory offense. Finally, attempting to blame the customer for the discrepancy without verifying the dealership's own reporting accuracy is also professionally unacceptable. The dealership has a primary responsibility to ensure accurate reporting to the state, regardless of customer actions, and must follow established procedures for resolving such issues. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to legal mandates and internal compliance policies. This involves a systematic process of identifying potential issues, verifying their nature and scope, consulting relevant regulations, in this case, Utah's motor vehicle laws, and escalating them through appropriate internal channels for timely and compliant resolution. The core principle is to act with integrity and transparency, ensuring that all actions align with the legal requirements of the jurisdiction. Question 5. During the evaluation of a driver's license applicant on a residential street in Salt Lake City, Utah, the applicant approaches a clearly marked stop sign at an intersection. What is the most critical action the applicant must demonstrate to comply with Utah traffic laws and ensure safety? Option A. Slow down significantly but proceed through the intersection without stopping if no other vehicles are immediately visible. Option B. Accelerate through the intersection to quickly clear the intersection. Option C. Make a rolling stop, briefly pausing before continuing through the intersection. Option D. Come to a complete stop before the marked stop line or intersection, and then yield to any traffic or pedestrians before proceeding when safe. The correct answer is D. Come to a complete stop before the marked stop line or intersection, and then yield to any traffic or pedestrians before proceeding when safe. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the applicant to demonstrate not only knowledge of Utah's traffic laws, but also the ability to apply them in a real-world driving context under observation. The examiner must assess the applicant's judgment and adherence to safety protocols, which are critical for public safety on Utah roadways. Misinterpreting or failing to follow specific Utah traffic regulations can lead to dangerous situations and potential accidents. Correct approach analysis. The best approach is to consistently obey all posted traffic signs and signals, including speed limits, stop signs, and yield signs, as mandated by the Utah Driver Handbook and Utah Code Title 41, Chapter 6A, Chapter 6, Traffic Laws. This demonstrates a fundamental understanding and respect for the established rules of the road, designed to ensure safety and order. Specifically, approaching a stop sign requires coming to a complete stop before the marked line or intersection, yielding to any traffic or pedestrians, and then proceeding when it is safe to do so, all in accordance with Utah Code 41-6A301. Incorrect approach is analysis. Failing to come to a complete stop at a stop sign, even if traffic appears clear, violates Utah Code 41-6A301 and demonstrates a disregard for traffic control devices. This is a critical safety failure. proceeding through an intersection without yielding to pedestrians or other vehicles when required by a yield sign or a stop sign situation, as outlined in Utah Code 41-6A302, shows a lack of awareness of right-of-way rules and a potential to cause collisions. Speeding or driving significantly below the posted speed limit without a valid reason, like hazardous conditions, can also be problematic. Driving too fast can lead to loss of control, while driving too slow can impede traffic flow and create hazardous situations, both of which are implicitly covered by the general duty to drive safely and in accordance with posted limits under Utah Code 41-6A601. Professional reasoning. Professionals evaluating driving skills must prioritize safety and adherence to the specific traffic laws of Utah. The decision-making process should involve observing the applicant's actions in relation to posted signs, signals, and general traffic laws. Any deviation that compromises safety or violates a specific Utah statute should be noted. The evaluation should focus on whether the applicant can safely and legally operate a vehicle within the framework of Utah's traffic regulations. Question 6. What factors determine the appropriate response when encountering an unusual traffic situation on a Utah highway that is not explicitly addressed by a specific traffic law? Option A. Prioritizing safety by proceeding with extreme caution, yielding to other traffic and pedestrians, and making a deliberate maneuver only when absolutely safe. Option B. Making a decision based on personal convenience and the perceived efficiency of the maneuver. Option C. Assuming the action is permissible because there is no specific Utah law prohibiting it. Option D. Relying on other drivers to anticipate and react to your actions in the ambiguous situation. The correct answer is A. Prioritizing safety by proceeding with extreme caution, yielding to other traffic and pedestrians, and making a deliberate maneuver only when absolutely safe. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an applicant to demonstrate a nuanced understanding of Utah's traffic laws beyond rote memorization. The challenge lies in applying general principles to a specific, potentially ambiguous situation, necessitating careful judgment to ensure safety and compliance. The applicant must not only know the rules, but also understand their underlying purpose in preventing accidents and maintaining order on Utah roadways. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves understanding that Utah's traffic laws, like those of most jurisdictions, prioritize safety and predictability. When encountering a situation not explicitly covered by a specific statute, the most responsible action is to proceed with extreme caution, yielding to other traffic and pedestrians, and making a clear, deliberate maneuver only when it is absolutely safe to do so. This aligns with the overarching principle of defensive driving and the general duty of care owed to all road users in Utah. This approach is correct because it prioritizes the safety of all individuals on the road, which is the fundamental purpose of traffic regulations in Utah. It also demonstrates an understanding that, while specific rules exist, the spirit of the law requires responsible action in all circumstances. Incorrect approaches analysis. Proceeding as if the situation is implicitly permitted by a lack of explicit prohibition is a failure to adhere to the spirit of Utah's traffic laws. While a specific rule might not exist for every conceivable scenario, the absence of a prohibition does not grant permission, especially if the action could compromise safety. This approach risks violating the general duty of care. Assuming that other drivers will anticipate your actions and react accordingly is a dangerous assumption that directly contravenes the principles of defensive driving emphasized in Utah's driver education. Road users have a right to expect predictable behavior, and relying on others to interpret ambiguous actions is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. Making a decision based solely on personal convenience or perceived efficiency, without a thorough assessment of safety and compliance with Utah's traffic code, demonstrates a disregard for the law and the well-being of others. This approach prioritizes individual benefit over collective safety, which is contrary to the regulatory framework governing road use in Utah. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such situations by first identifying the core safety principles embedded within the relevant jurisdiction's traffic laws. They should then consider how their actions might impact other road users and whether their intended maneuver aligns with the general duty of care. When in doubt, erring on the side of caution and prioritizing safety over speed or convenience is always the most professionally sound decision, reflecting a commitment to regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. Question 7. The control framework reveals that when approaching an intersection in Utah where a traffic signal is malfunctioning and flashing red in all directions, what is the legally required procedure for drivers? Option A. Proceed through the intersection cautiously without stopping, assuming other drivers will yield. Option B. Treat the intersection as a four-way stop, coming to a complete stop before proceeding when it is safe to do so. Option C. Honk the horn to alert other drivers and then proceed through the intersection. Option D. Wait for another driver to enter the intersection first before proceeding. Correct answer is B. Treat the intersection as a four-way stop, coming to a complete stop before proceeding when it is safe to do so. Explanation. The control framework reveals the importance of understanding and adhering to Utah's specific traffic laws and regulations when operating a motor vehicle. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an applicant to demonstrate not only the physical ability to drive, but also a thorough comprehension of the legal responsibilities and safety protocols mandated by the Utah Department of Public Safety, DPS, for obtaining a driver's license. Misinterpreting or disregarding these regulations can lead to a failed test, potential safety hazards, and a lack of preparedness for real-world driving. The correct approach involves accurately identifying and applying the rules of the road as outlined in the Utah Driver Handbook and relevant Utah code. This means understanding the specific requirements for yielding, signaling, speed limits, and other critical driving maneuvers. Adhering to these established guidelines is paramount for demonstrating competence and ensuring public safety, which is the primary objective of the Utah DMV's licensing process. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the regulatory framework established by Utah law to ensure all licensed drivers possess the necessary knowledge and skills to operate a vehicle safely and legally within the state. An incorrect approach would be to assume general driving knowledge is sufficient without consulting or understanding Utah's specific regulations. This fails to meet the legal requirements for licensing, as each state has its own nuances in traffic law. Another incorrect approach would be to prioritize speed or efficiency over safety and adherence to rules, such as making unsafe lane changes or failing to yield appropriately. This directly violates the principles of safe driving and the specific mandates of Utah's traffic code, demonstrating a lack of understanding of the responsibilities associated with holding a driver's license. A further incorrect approach would be to rely on outdated information or personal opinions about driving rather than the official, current regulations provided by the Utah DPS. This can lead to the application of incorrect or unsafe practices, failing to meet the standards set by the licensing authority. Professionals should approach situations like this by prioritizing a thorough review of the official Utah Driver Handbook and any supplementary materials provided by the Utah DPS. They should then actively seek to understand the practical application of these rules through practice, and if necessary, professional instruction. The decision-making process should always be guided by the principle of adhering to the established legal and safety standards of Utah. Question 8. The control framework reveals that when driving in Salt Lake City, Utah, a driver intends to change lanes to the left. Which of the following actions best demonstrates compliance with Utah's traffic regulation regarding signaling intentions? Option A. Activating the left turn signal at least 100 feet before initiating the lane change. Option B. Assuming other drivers will anticipate the lane change and not signaling at all. Option C. Briefly flashing the left turn signal just as the vehicle begins to drift into the new lane. Option D. Activating the left turn signal and then immediately changing lanes without checking mirrors. The correct answer is A. Activating the left turn signal at least 100 feet before initiating the lane change. Explanation. The control framework reveals the critical importance of adhering to Utah's specific traffic laws and regulations when operating a vehicle, particularly concerning the proper use of signaling devices. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual to demonstrate not only knowledge of the law, but also the ability to apply it in a practical, real-world driving context, where immediate decisions have safety implications. Misinterpreting or ignoring these regulations can lead to accidents, citations, and a failure to obtain a driver's license, all of which have significant consequences. The correct approach involves understanding and demonstrating the requirement to signal intentions for turns or lane changes at least 100 feet before the maneuver, as stipulated by Utah law. This proactive signaling is crucial for alerting other drivers, pedestrians, and cyclists to your intended actions, thereby preventing collisions and ensuring smooth traffic flow. Adhering to this rule is a direct compliance with Utah Code Annotated Section 41-6A804, which mandates the use of turn signals. An incorrect approach that fails to signal intentions or signals too late is a direct violation of Utah traffic law. This failure to communicate intent creates a hazardous situation by leaving other road users unaware of the driver's plans, increasing the risk of a sideswipe, rear-end collision, or failure to yield. Another incorrect approach, such as signaling for a turn but then proceeding straight, can also be confusing and dangerous, leading to misinterpretations by other drivers and potentially causing them to take evasive action that could result in an accident. Relying on assumptions about what other drivers might do or see, rather than actively communicating intentions through proper signaling, is a fundamental breakdown in safe driving practice and regulatory compliance. Professionals should approach such situations by prioritizing clear and timely communication of their intentions on the road. This involves a conscious effort to activate turn signals well in advance of any turn or lane change, and to ensure the signal is consistent with the actual maneuver. A mental checklist, including checking mirrors, signaling, and then executing the maneuver, should be an ingrained habit. When in doubt about whether a signal is necessary, it is always safer to signal. This systematic approach ensures compliance with legal requirements and promotes a safer driving environment for everyone. Question 9. Process analysis reveals that a driver's license applicant in Utah presents for their driving test, but states they forgot their prescription glasses at home, despite having a valid prescription. The applicant insists they can still see well enough to drive and requests to proceed with the test. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Utah driver license examiner? Option A. Allow the applicant to proceed with the driving test, with a note on their record that they claim to have a prescription but did not have their glasses, and instruct them to get their vision checked and updated within 30 days. Option B. Conduct the driving test immediately, and then suggest the applicant visit an optometrist as soon as possible to ensure their vision meets the legal requirements for driving. Option C. Politely inform the applicant that the vision screening is a mandatory requirement for all driver's license applicants in Utah and cannot be waived, and therefore, they must reschedule their test after obtaining and wearing their corrective lenses for the screening. Option D. Waive the vision screening requirement for this applicant, given their assertion of good vision and possession of a prescription, and proceed with the driving test. The correct answer is C. Politely inform the applicant that the vision screening is a mandatory requirement for all driver's license applicants in Utah and cannot be waived, and therefore, they must reschedule their test after obtaining and wearing their corrective lenses for the screening. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for a driver's license with the legal and ethical obligation to ensure the applicant meets all safety and regulatory requirements. The examiner is in a position of authority and trust, and any deviation from established procedures can have serious consequences, including putting untrained drivers on Utah's roads, which compromises public safety and undermines the integrity of the licensing process. The pressure to accommodate a seemingly minor issue must be weighed against the absolute mandate of the Utah Driver License Act. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice is to strictly adhere to the established procedures for obtaining a Utah driver's license, which includes the mandatory vision screening. This approach is correct because Utah law, as outlined in the Utah Driver License Act, Utah Code Title 41, Chapter 2, mandates specific requirements for obtaining a driver's license, including a vision test. Section 41-2-204 explicitly states that the department shall test the applicant's eyesight. Failing to administer this test, even for a seemingly minor reason, is a direct violation of this statutory requirement. Ethically, the examiner has a duty to uphold public safety by ensuring all licensed drivers meet minimum vision standards. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to waive the vision screening based on the applicant's assertion that they have glasses. This is incorrect because the law requires an actual screening to verify vision standards, not just a self-declaration. The applicant's glasses may not correct their vision to the legally required standard for driving in Utah, or they may not be wearing them correctly. This approach bypasses a critical safety check mandated by statute. Another incorrect approach is to allow the applicant to proceed with the driving test and suggest they get their vision checked later. This is incorrect because it allows an individual who has not met a fundamental licensing requirement to operate a vehicle on public roads. This directly contravenes the purpose of the vision screening, which is to prevent potentially unsafe drivers from being licensed in the first place. It also creates a loophole that undermines the entire licensing process. A further incorrect approach is to offer to pass the vision screening without a proper test, assuming the applicant will eventually get glasses. This is ethically reprehensible and a severe regulatory violation. It constitutes falsification of records and a dereliction of duty, directly endangering public safety and violating the trust placed in the examiner. This approach prioritizes expediency over safety and legality. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this role must adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to legal mandates and ethical responsibilities. When faced with a situation where a procedural requirement appears minor or can be easily circumvented, the professional must first consult the relevant statutes and departmental policies. The guiding principle should always be public safety and the integrity of the licensing process. If a requirement is mandated by law, it cannot be waived or bypassed, regardless of perceived convenience or pressure. The professional should clearly communicate the requirement to the applicant and explain that it must be met before proceeding. If the applicant cannot meet the requirement at that time, they should be informed of the steps necessary to fulfill it, such as obtaining a corrected prescription and returning for the screening. Question 10. The assessment process reveals that during a Utah DMV knowledge test, an applicant becomes visibly distressed and asks if they can use their phone to quickly look up the answer to a question about right-of-way rules at an uncontrolled intersection, stating they are very nervous and want to ensure they get it right. If the applicant were to pass this question by looking it up, their score would be 80%, meeting the minimum passing threshold of 75% required by Utah law. What is the most appropriate course of action for the examiner? Option A. Provide the applicant with the correct answer to the question to alleviate their stress and ensure they pass. Option B. Allow the applicant to use their phone to look up the answer, as their score would still meet the passing requirement and the examiner wants to be accommodating. Option C. Inform the applicant that using a phone is not permitted during the test and that they must answer based on their own knowledge, offering a brief explanation of the right-of-way rule if they are still struggling after the test. Option D. Immediately end the test and fail the applicant for requesting to use their phone. The correct answer is C. Inform the applicant that using a phone is not permitted during the test and that they must answer based on their own knowledge, offering a brief explanation of the right-of-way rule if they are still struggling after the test. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a scenario that is professionally challenging due to the inherent conflict between the applicant's perceived need for a driver's license and the strict legal requirements for passing the Utah DMV knowledge test. The examiner must uphold the integrity of the testing process while also being fair and objective. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the applicant's situation does not compromise the safety standards mandated by Utah law for all licensed drivers. The best professional approach involves strictly adhering to the established testing protocols and the Utah Driver Handbook. This means the examiner must inform the applicant that the test must be completed according to the rules, without any external assistance. The Utah Driver Handbook, which is the basis for the knowledge test, outlines the specific traffic laws, road signs, and safe driving practices that all applicants must demonstrate understanding of. U.C.A. Section 41-2-201 mandates that applicants must pass a knowledge test to demonstrate their understanding of traffic laws and safe driving. Allowing any form of assistance, even if seemingly minor or intended to alleviate stress, would violate this statute and compromise the validity of the test. It would also set a dangerous precedent, potentially leading to unqualified individuals obtaining licenses and endangering public safety, which is the primary concern of the Utah Department of Public Safety. An incorrect approach would be to provide the applicant with hints or answers to the questions. This directly violates U.C.A. Section 41-2-201 and the integrity of the testing process. It undermines the purpose of the knowledge test, which is to assess an individual's independent comprehension of driving laws. Another incorrect approach would be to allow the applicant to use their phone to look up answers. This is a clear violation of testing rules and is explicitly prohibited in most standardized testing environments, including the Utah DMV, constitutes cheating and invalidates the test results. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to simply fail the applicant without explaining the consequences of their actions or offering information about retesting procedures. While the applicant may not pass, a professional examiner should still provide clear communication regarding the reasons for failure and the available options for future attempts. As per general customer service principles within government agencies, the professional reasoning process for this situation involves prioritizing adherence to legal mandates and ethical responsibilities. The examiner must first identify the core requirement, assessing the applicant's knowledge of Utah traffic laws. Then, they must evaluate the applicant's request against the established rules and regulations. If the request compromises these rules, the examiner must politely but firmly decline, explaining the necessity of following the established procedure. The examiner should then offer clear guidance on how the applicant can proceed within the legal framework, such as retaking the test after further study. Question 11. Strategic planning requires an examiner for the Utah Division of Motor Vehicles to consider how to handle a situation where a candidate for a driver's license is a personal acquaintance and is visibly struggling with a critical maneuver during the road test. What is the most ethically sound and professionally responsible course of action for the examiner to take? Option A. Provide subtle verbal cues or hints to help the acquaintance successfully complete the difficult maneuver, ensuring they pass the test. Option B. Pass the acquaintance despite the observed struggles, rationalizing that the personal connection warrants a more lenient evaluation to avoid conflict. Option C. Continue the test, objectively documenting all observations and making a licensing decision based solely on the candidate's performance against established Utah DMV standards. Option D. Immediately end the test and inform the acquaintance that the personal relationship makes it impossible to proceed fairly, suggesting they reschedule with a different examiner. The correct answer is C. Continue the test, objectively documenting all observations and making a licensing decision based solely on the candidate's performance against established Utah DMV standards. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for a driver's license with the ethical obligation to ensure public safety and uphold the integrity of the Utah Division of Motor Vehicles, DMV, licensing process. The examiner is faced with a situation where a candidate, who is a friend, appears to be struggling with a critical aspect of the driving test, potentially jeopardizing road safety if licensed. Careful judgment is required to avoid both perceived or actual bias, and to ensure that only qualified individuals are granted driving privileges in Utah. The best professional approach involves adhering strictly to the established testing protocols and objective evaluation criteria set forth by the Utah DMV. This means continuing the test as scheduled, documenting all observations accurately, and making a decision based solely on the candidate's performance against the defined standards. This approach is correct because it upholds the principle of fairness and impartiality, ensuring that all applicants are evaluated under the same objective criteria. It directly aligns with the Utah DMV's mandate to license safe drivers and prevents any appearance of favoritism, which could undermine public trust in the licensing process and potentially lead to unsafe drivers on Utah's roads. An incorrect approach would be to offer unsolicited hints or subtly guide the candidate through the difficult maneuver. This is ethically problematic as it compromises the integrity of the test by not evaluating the candidate's independent driving ability. It creates an unfair advantage for this individual over other applicants and violates the spirit of objective assessment mandated by the Utah DMV. Furthermore, it could lead to the licensing of an individual who has not demonstrated the necessary skills, thereby increasing the risk of accidents on Utah roadways. Another incorrect approach would be to prematurely terminate the test and inform the candidate that they are failing due to their personal relationship, suggesting they try again later. This is professionally unacceptable because it introduces personal bias into the evaluation and fails to provide a clear, objective assessment based on performance. It also does not allow for a complete evaluation of the candidate's driving skills, which is required by the Utah DMV. This approach could also lead to resentment and accusations of unfairness. A third incorrect approach would be to pass the candidate despite clear indications of struggle, rationalizing that the personal relationship warrants leniency. This is a severe ethical and professional failure. It directly contradicts the Utah DMV's primary responsibility to ensure public safety by licensing only competent drivers. Overlooking critical errors to accommodate a personal connection creates a significant risk to other road users in Utah and erodes the credibility of the entire licensing system. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes objectivity, adherence to regulations, and the public interest. This involves understanding the specific testing criteria, documenting all observations without personal interpretation, and making a final decision based solely on whether the candidate meets the established standards for a Utah driver's license. If there is any doubt about the candidate's ability to safely operate a vehicle, the test should be failed, and the candidate should be informed of the specific areas needing improvement, as per Utah DMV procedures. Question 12. The assessment process reveals that Ms. Evans, a licensed driving examiner for the Utah Department of Public Safety Driver License Division, is scheduled to administer a road test to her nephew. Ms. Evans is concerned about the potential for her personal relationship to influence her professional judgment, even if she believes she can remain objective. What is the most appropriate course of action for Ms. Evans to ensure the integrity of the Utah driver's license examination process? Option A. Ms. Evans should immediately inform her supervisor of the situation and request that another qualified examiner administer the road test to her nephew. Option B. Ms. Evans should proceed with administering the test, confident in her ability to remain impartial and provide a fair evaluation. Option C. Ms. Evans should administer the test but provide her nephew with specific insider tips on how to pass the exam, beyond general driving advice. Option D. Ms. Evans should administer the test and then adjust the scoring to ensure her nephew passes, given their familial relationship. The correct answer is A. Ms. Evans should immediately inform her supervisor of the situation and request that another qualified examiner administer the road test to her nephew. Explanation: the assessment process reveals a situation where a driving instructor, Ms. Evans, is faced with a conflict between her professional duty and a personal relationship. This scenario is professionally challenging because it tests Ms. Evans's ability to maintain objectivity and uphold the integrity of the Utah driver's license examination process while dealing with a personal connection to an applicant. The Utah Department of Public Safety Driver License Division, DPS-DLD, regulations mandate that all applicants be evaluated fairly and impartially, without favoritism or prejudice. The ethical obligation of an examiner is to ensure that only those who meet the required driving standards are licensed, thereby protecting public safety. The best professional approach involves Ms. Evans recognizing the inherent conflict of interest and taking immediate steps to recuse herself from evaluating her nephew. This approach upholds the principles of fairness, impartiality, and the integrity of the licensing process as mandated by Utah DPS-DLD guidelines. By arranging for another qualified examiner to conduct the test, Ms. Evans ensures that her nephew receives an unbiased assessment and that the public trust in the licensing system is maintained. This action directly aligns with the ethical imperative to avoid even the appearance of impropriety. An incorrect approach would be for Ms. Evans to proceed with the examination, believing she can remain objective. This fails to acknowledge the potential for unconscious bias and violates the spirit, if not the letter, of impartiality regulations. The appearance of favoritism, even if unintentional, can erode public confidence and compromise the fairness of the examination. Another incorrect approach would be to conduct the test, but then inflate the score to ensure her nephew passes. This is a direct violation of examination integrity and constitutes a fraudulent act, undermining the entire purpose of the driver's license assessment and potentially placing an unqualified driver on Utah's roads. Finally, advising her nephew on specific test maneuvers or tips beyond general driving advice, even if not directly administering the test, could be construed as providing an unfair advantage, thus compromising the standardized nature of the evaluation required by Utah DPS-DLD. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes ethical conduct and regulatory compliance. This involves identifying potential conflicts of interest early, understanding the relevant regulations and ethical codes, and taking proactive steps to mitigate any risks to the integrity of their professional duties. When a conflict is identified, the most responsible action is to seek guidance from supervisors or to recuse oneself from the situation, ensuring that the process remains fair and unbiased for all involved. Question 13. The assessment process reveals a driving test candidate in Utah exhibiting extreme nervousness to the point of near panic during their road examination. As a licensed examiner, how should you proceed to ensure a fair and accurate evaluation while adhering to Utah's licensing standards? Option A. Ignore the candidate's nervousness and proceed with the test without any acknowledgement, focusing solely on the mechanics of driving. Option B. Allow the candidate to pause the test indefinitely until their anxiety subsides, regardless of the scheduled time or impact on other appointments. Option C. Modify the test route and simplify maneuvers to reduce the candidate's anxiety, allowing them to complete the test with less pressure. Option D. Acknowledge the candidate's nervousness, offer brief reassurance, and proceed with the standard road test evaluation as per Utah Driver License Division protocols, documenting all observed driving performance objectively. The correct answer is D. Acknowledge the candidate's nervousness, offer brief reassurance, and proceed with the standard road test evaluation as per Utah Driver License Division protocols, documenting all observed driving performance objectively. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a situation where a driving examiner in Utah is faced with a candidate who exhibits significant nervousness, bordering on panic, during the road test. This scenario is professionally challenging because the examiner must balance the need to accurately assess the candidate's driving ability, according to Utah's established testing standards, with the ethical responsibility to ensure the candidate is not unduly disadvantaged by extreme anxiety. The examiner's judgment is critical to avoid misinterpreting nervousness as a lack of skill, or, conversely, overlooking genuine safety concerns due to sympathy. The best approach involves a structured, empathetic, yet firm adherence to the Utah Driver License Division's testing protocols. This means acknowledging the candidate's distress without altering the core assessment criteria. The examiner should verbally reassure the candidate that the test is designed to evaluate their skills under normal driving conditions and that their nervousness is understood. They should then proceed with the standard maneuvers and observations as outlined in the Utah Driver Handbook and the Official Examiner's Manual. If the nervousness leads to specific driving errors that violate safety standards or testing requirements, these must be documented and scored accordingly, regardless of the cause. This approach is correct because it upholds the integrity of the licensing process, ensuring that all candidates are evaluated on the same objective criteria, while also demonstrating professional courtesy and understanding. It aligns with the Utah Driver License Division's mandate to issue licenses to competent and safe drivers. An incorrect approach would be to significantly alter the test route or simplify maneuvers to accommodate the candidate's anxiety. This is professionally unacceptable because it compromises the standardization and validity of the driving test. The purpose of the test is to simulate real-world driving conditions, and deviating from the standard assessment would mean the candidate might not be adequately prepared for actual road hazards. This violates the principle of objective evaluation and could lead to the issuance of a license to someone who has not demonstrated proficiency in all required areas, potentially endangering themselves and others. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the candidate's nervousness and proceed with the test without any acknowledgement or attempt at reassurance. While this might seem like strict adherence to the test, it fails to account for the human element and the potential for extreme anxiety to temporarily impair performance. This could lead to a candidate failing due to factors beyond their fundamental driving ability, which is ethically questionable and does not reflect a comprehensive assessment of their potential as a safe driver. A third incorrect approach would be to allow the candidate to continue the test indefinitely, hoping their nervousness will subside, without regard for the scheduled time or the impact on subsequent candidates. This is unprofessional as it disrupts the operational efficiency of the testing center and disrespects the time of other individuals. It also fails to make a definitive assessment within the established parameters of the test. The professional reasoning framework for such situations involves a tiered approach. First, recognize and acknowledge the candidate's emotional state. Second, reaffirm the testing process and its objectives. Third, proceed with the standard assessment, documenting all observed behaviors and driving actions objectively. Fourth, if specific errors occur due to anxiety, evaluate them against the established criteria for safety and proficiency. Finally, make a decision based on the documented performance, ensuring fairness, objectivity, and adherence to Utah's licensing standards. Question 14. Operational review demonstrates that a close friend who has recently moved to Utah but has not yet established permanent residency is seeking your assistance in obtaining a Utah driver's license. They are asking for help in using your address temporarily to meet the residency requirement, as they are eager to drive legally in the state. Considering the Utah Driver License Act and its administrative rules, what is the most appropriate and legally sound course of action? Option A. Advise your friend that they must meet all official Utah residency requirements and provide proper documentation before applying for a driver's license, and offer to help them understand the correct application process once they are eligible. Option B. Inform your friend that residency requirements are often flexible and encourage them to apply using their current situation, as they are living in Utah. Option C. Agree to let your friend use your address on their driver's license application to help them meet the residency requirement, as they are a close friend. Option D. Suggest that your friend apply for the license and hope that the Utah DMV does not scrutinize their residency documentation too closely. The correct answer is A. Advise your friend that they must meet all official Utah residency requirements and provide proper documentation before applying for a driver's license, and offer to help them understand the correct application process once they are eligible. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it involves a conflict between a desire to assist a friend and the strict legal requirements for obtaining a Utah driver's license. The challenge lies in recognizing that personal relationships should not override legal obligations and the potential consequences of facilitating a violation. Careful judgment is required to uphold the integrity of the licensing process. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice is to inform the friend about the correct and legal procedures for obtaining a Utah driver's license, emphasizing the necessity of meeting all eligibility requirements, including residency and proper documentation. This approach is correct because it adheres strictly to Utah's Driver License Act and the administrative rules governing the issuance of licenses. It upholds the ethical duty of a professional to act with integrity and to ensure that all legal requirements are met, thereby protecting the public by ensuring only qualified individuals are licensed. This aligns with the principle of lawful conduct expected of all individuals interacting with state agencies. Incorrect approaches analysis. Providing the friend with a false address or assisting them in falsifying residency documents is a direct violation of Utah's Driver License Act. This action constitutes fraud and could lead to severe penalties for both the individual and the person providing assistance, including fines, license revocation, and potential criminal charges. Ethically, it undermines the trust placed in individuals to uphold the law and compromises the safety of the public by potentially licensing an unqualified driver. Suggesting that the friend obtain a Utah driver's license without fulfilling the residency requirement is also a violation. Utah law clearly defines residency requirements for obtaining a driver's license, and circumventing these rules is illegal. This approach fails to uphold the professional responsibility to ensure compliance with state statutes and could result in the issuance of a license to someone who does not meet the legal criteria, posing a risk to public safety. Ignoring the friend's request and not offering any guidance, while not actively participating in a violation, is a missed opportunity to uphold professional integrity and assist a friend within legal boundaries. While it avoids direct complicity, it does not demonstrate a commitment to ethical conduct or a willingness to guide others toward lawful compliance. A more proactive and ethical stance would involve educating the friend on the correct procedures. Professional reasoning. Professionals interacting with state licensing processes should always prioritize adherence to the governing statutes and regulations. When faced with requests that appear to circumvent these rules, the decision-making process should involve 1. Identifying the relevant laws and regulations, in this case, Utah's Driver License Act and associated administrative rules. 2. Assessing the request against these legal requirements. 3. If the request is non-compliant, clearly and politely explaining the legal requirements and the reasons why the request cannot be fulfilled. 4. Offering assistance in navigating the correct legal procedures. This ensures both personal integrity and compliance with the law. Question 15. Cost-benefit analysis shows that expediting a driver's license for a seemingly responsible individual who is missing a minor piece of documentation might save time and reduce applicant frustration. However, As a Utah DMV examiner, what is the most ethically and legally sound approach to this situation? Option A. Waive the requirement for the missing documentation, citing the applicant's apparent good character and the potential benefit of getting them on the road quickly. Option B. Allow the applicant to take the driving test, and if they pass, process the license while advising them to submit the missing document at their earliest convenience. Option C. Politely inform the applicant that all required documentation must be presented before the driving test can proceed, and reschedule the test for a later date once the documentation is provided. Option D. Issue the driver's license with a note to the applicant that the missing documentation must be submitted within 48 hours, as the applicant appears trustworthy. Correct answer is C. Politely inform the applicant that all required documentation must be presented before the driving test can proceed, and reschedule the test for a later date once the documentation is provided. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for a driver's license with the legal and ethical obligation to ensure the applicant meets all safety and regulatory requirements. The Department of Motor Vehicles, DMV, in Utah has a responsibility to the public to ensure that only qualified individuals operate motor vehicles, thereby minimizing risks on public roadways. The examiner must exercise sound judgment, adhering strictly to established procedures and legal mandates, without succumbing to external pressures or personal biases. The best professional approach involves a thorough and objective assessment of the applicant's ability to operate a vehicle safely and in compliance with Utah's traffic laws. This includes meticulously verifying all required documentation and ensuring the applicant demonstrates proficiency in all aspects of the driving test as outlined by the Utah DMV. This approach is correct because it directly upholds the legal mandate of the Utah DMV to license competent drivers and prioritizes public safety above all else. It aligns with the ethical duty of a public servant to act impartially and in accordance with established regulations. An approach that bypasses or shortcuts the required documentation checks is professionally unacceptable. This failure constitutes a direct violation of Utah's administrative rules governing driver licensing, potentially leading to the issuance of a license to an unqualified individual. Ethically, it represents a dereliction of duty and a breach of public trust, as it compromises the safety of other road users. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to allow personal feelings or assumptions about the applicant's character or circumstances to influence the evaluation. This introduces bias into the assessment process, which is contrary to the principles of fairness and impartiality mandated by Utah law and ethical public service. The driving test is a standardized evaluation of driving skills, not a judgment of personal worth or need. Finally, an approach that overlooks minor errors in the applicant's driving performance, even if seemingly insignificant, is also professionally flawed. Utah's DMV regulations specify criteria for passing the driving test, and any deviation from these standards, without proper justification or documented waiver, undermines the integrity of the licensing process. It can lead to a false sense of security for the applicant and potentially create a hazard on the road. Professionals in this role should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to established protocols, objective evaluation, and a commitment to public safety. This involves understanding the specific legal requirements of the Utah DMV, maintaining impartiality, and consistently applying the same standards to all applicants. When faced with pressure or unusual circumstances, the professional should consult supervisory guidance or relevant policy documents to ensure compliance. Question 16. The performance metrics show a significant increase in reported near-miss incidents involving commercial drivers operating within Utah. As a safety supervisor for the Utah Department of Motor Vehicles, what is the most appropriate course of action to address this trend while adhering to Utah's traffic laws and administrative procedures? Option A. Immediately suspend the driver's licenses of all commercial drivers who have been involved in any reported near-miss incident. Option B. Conduct a detailed investigation into the root causes of the near misses and implement targeted educational programs or retraining for drivers exhibiting patterns of risky behavior. Option C. Mandate a universal, one-size-fits-all remedial driving course for all commercial drivers in Utah. Option D. Disregard the near-miss reports as they do not constitute direct violations of Utah's traffic code. The correct answer is B. Conduct a detailed investigation into the root causes of the near misses and implement targeted educational programs or retraining for drivers exhibiting patterns of risky behavior. Explanation. The performance metrics show a concerning trend in the number of reported near-miss incidents involving commercial drivers operating under Utah's Department of Motor Vehicles, DMV, regulations. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need to address safety concerns with the potential for overzealous enforcement that could unfairly penalize drivers or create an unnecessarily burdensome regulatory environment. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any action taken is both effective in improving safety and compliant with Utah's traffic laws and administrative procedures. The best professional approach involves a thorough, data-driven investigation into the root causes of the reported near misses. This means meticulously reviewing the incident reports, identifying common contributing factors, e.g., specific road conditions, time of day, driver fatigue, vehicle maintenance issues, and cross-referencing these findings with existing Utah DMV regulations and best practices for commercial driver safety. Based on this analysis, the appropriate action would be to develop targeted educational materials and potentially implement focused retraining programs for drivers exhibiting patterns of risky behavior, all while ensuring these interventions are consistent with Utah's driver handbook and commercial vehicle safety standards. This approach prioritizes proactive safety improvement through understanding and education, aligning with the Utah DMV's mandate to ensure public safety on state roadways without resorting to punitive measures without due cause. An approach that immediately suspends the licenses of all drivers involved in any reported near-miss incident, regardless of severity or contributing factors, is professionally unacceptable. This fails to acknowledge that not all near misses are indicative of gross negligence or a direct violation of Utah traffic laws. Such an action would be overly punitive, potentially violating due process principles and exceeding the scope of disciplinary action typically warranted for near misses under Utah's administrative rules for driver licensing. Another professionally unacceptable approach would be to dismiss the near-miss reports entirely, citing them as anecdotal and not direct evidence of violations of Utah's traffic code. This ignores the proactive safety mandate of the Utah DMV and the importance of identifying potential hazards before they result in actual accidents. Failing to investigate near misses means missing opportunities to prevent future collisions, which is contrary to the department's responsibility to ensure the safety of Utah's roads. Finally, implementing a blanket policy of mandatory, one-size-fits-all remedial driving courses for all commercial drivers in Utah based solely on the increase in near-miss reports, without specific driver-level analysis, is also professionally unsound. While education is valuable, this approach lacks the specificity to address the actual causes of the near misses and could be an inefficient use of resources, potentially burdening drivers who are not contributing to the problem. It also fails to consider the nuances of individual driving performance and the specific circumstances leading to each near miss, which is crucial for effective intervention under Utah's regulatory framework. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the regulatory mandate. In this case, Utah DMV's focus on public safety and driver competence. This should be followed by a thorough data analysis to identify the problem's scope and root causes. Interventions should then be developed that are proportionate to the identified risks, evidence-based, and compliant with all applicable Utah laws and administrative procedures, prioritizing education and targeted intervention over broad punitive measures. Question 17. The evaluation methodology shows that during a Utah driver's license road test, an applicant, visibly nervous, momentarily hesitates and then proceeds through an intersection without yielding to an oncoming vehicle that had to brake sharply to avoid a collision. What is the most appropriate and ethically sound course of action for the examiner? Option A. Pass the applicant, advising them to be more careful in the future, given their apparent nervousness. Option B. Stop the vehicle, explain the error to the applicant, and allow them to reattempt the maneuver. Option C. Immediately terminate the road test and record the failure due to the critical safety violation of failing to yield. Option D. Allow the applicant to continue the test, noting the error, and then fail them at the end of the test for the same infraction. Correct answer is C. Immediately terminate the road test and record the failure due to the critical safety violation of failing to yield. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows that ethical dilemmas are a critical component of assessing a driver's readiness for the road in Utah. This scenario is professionally challenging because it pits the applicant's immediate desire to pass against the examiner's duty to uphold public safety and the integrity of the licensing process. A driver's license is a privilege, not a right, and it signifies a demonstrated ability to operate a vehicle safely and responsibly within Utah's traffic laws. The examiner must exercise careful judgment to ensure that the applicant truly possesses these qualities, even under pressure. The best approach involves a strict adherence to the established testing protocol and a commitment to objective evaluation. This means meticulously observing the applicant's performance against the official Utah Driver Handbook standards and the specific criteria outlined for the road test. If the applicant demonstrates a critical safety violation, such as failing to yield the right-of-way at an intersection, the examiner must immediately terminate the test and record the failure. This is correct because Utah law and DMV regulations mandate that all drivers must operate their vehicles in a manner that ensures the safety of themselves and others. Failing to yield is a direct violation of Utah Code Title 41, Chapter 6A, Chapter 11, Part 101, Right-of-Way of Pedestrians and Vehicles. The examiner's primary ethical and legal obligation is to prevent unsafe drivers from obtaining a license, thereby protecting the public. An incorrect approach would be to overlook a minor error or to allow the applicant to correct a significant mistake during the test. This is ethically and regulatorily unsound because it compromises the standardization and validity of the road test. The test is designed to assess the applicant's ability to perform safely under typical driving conditions, not to provide on-the-spot remedial training. Allowing a correction implies that the initial failure was acceptable, which undermines the seriousness of traffic laws and the importance of safe driving habits. Furthermore, it could lead to a situation where an applicant who is not truly proficient is licensed, posing a risk to other road users in Utah. Another incorrect approach would be to pass the applicant despite a clear safety violation, perhaps due to sympathy for their perceived effort or anxiety. This is a severe ethical and regulatory breach. The examiner's role is not to be a sympathetic observer, but an impartial evaluator. Utah's DMV has a responsibility to ensure that all licensed drivers meet a minimum standard of competence. Overlooking a critical error for personal reasons is a dereliction of duty and directly violates the principle of public safety that underpins all driver licensing regulations. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to allow the applicant to continue the test after a critical failure, and then fail them at the end for the same reason. While the outcome might be the same, the process is flawed. The test should be terminated immediately upon a critical safety infraction to prevent further potential hazards and to clearly communicate the severity of the violation. Continuing the test after such a failure can create a false sense of security for the applicant and does not accurately reflect the immediate consequences of unsafe driving in real-world scenarios within Utah. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of the testing criteria, an unwavering commitment to objective evaluation, and a prioritization of public safety above all else. Examiners should be trained to recognize critical safety violations and to act decisively and consistently according to established protocols. When in doubt, erring on the side of caution and upholding the integrity of the testing process is paramount. Question 18. Analysis of a situation at the Utah Department of Public Safety Driver License Division Office. An applicant, who is visibly distressed and explains they urgently need a driver's license to start a new job tomorrow, has failed the written knowledge test for the third time. They plead with the licensing agent to issue them a license anyway, stating they are a good driver and will study harder for the next attempt. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action for the licensing agent to take? Option A. Advise the applicant that while the written test is important, their demonstrated driving skills in the practical test are more critical, and proceed with issuing the license based on the practical test performance. Option B. Suggest the applicant reschedule their test for another day and discreetly mention that sometimes extra help can be arranged for those who are struggling with the knowledge portion. Option C. Inform the applicant that they must successfully pass the written knowledge test, along with all other required tests and documentation, before a driver's license can be issued, and provide information on retesting procedures. Option D. Issue a temporary permit with a note that the applicant must pass the written knowledge test within a specified short period, acknowledging their urgent need. The correct answer is C. Inform the applicant that they must successfully pass the written knowledge test, along with all other required tests and documentation, before a driver's license can be issued, and provide information on retesting procedures. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for a driver's license with the legal and ethical obligation to ensure all applicants meet the safety standards mandated by Utah law. The core conflict lies between a perceived urgency and the non-negotiable requirements for public safety. Careful judgment is required to navigate this situation without compromising integrity or the safety of other road users. The best professional practice involves adhering strictly to the established procedures for driver's license issuance as outlined by the Utah Department of Public Safety, DPS, Driver License Division. This approach prioritizes public safety and legal compliance above all else. The applicant must successfully complete all required testing, including the vision, knowledge, and driving skills tests, and provide all necessary documentation as per Utah Code Annotated, UCA, Title 41, Chapter 2, Motor Vehicle Safety Act. This ensures that only qualified individuals are granted the privilege of driving, thereby upholding the integrity of the licensing system and protecting the community. An incorrect approach would be to overlook the applicant's failure to pass the knowledge test and proceed with issuing a license. This directly violates UCA 41-2-201, which mandates that applicants must demonstrate proficiency in traffic laws and safe driving practices. Issuing a license without this demonstration creates a significant public safety risk and undermines the purpose of the knowledge test. Another incorrect approach would be to offer the applicant a temporary or provisional license without them passing the knowledge test, perhaps with the promise of completing it later. This is not a recognized category of license under Utah law for this situation and circumvents the established process. It creates a false sense of legitimacy and still places an unqualified driver on the road, violating the spirit and letter of the law. A further incorrect approach would be to suggest the applicant find someone else to help them pass the test, or to imply that the test can be bypassed through informal means. This constitutes unethical conduct and potentially illegal facilitation of a fraudulent license application. It erodes public trust in the licensing authority and directly contravenes the principles of fairness and equal application of the law. Professionals in this role should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the governing regulations. Utah Code Annotated, Title 41, Chapter 2. When faced with an applicant who does not meet the requirements, the professional must clearly communicate the specific deficiencies and the steps required to rectify them. The focus should always be on upholding the law and ensuring public safety, rather than accommodating individual circumstances that fall outside the established legal framework. Question 19. The review process indicates a need to reinforce ethical conduct among licensing personnel in Utah. You are a licensing agent at a Utah Department of Public Safety driver license office. Your niece, who you have not seen in several years, arrives to apply for her learner's permit. She has brought her birth certificate but is missing the required proof of Utah residency. She's visibly anxious about failing the knowledge test and asks if you can help her out by allowing her to take the test today and perhaps reminding her of some answers if she gets stuck. How should you proceed? Option A. Advise your niece to return with all the necessary documentation and suggest she study the official Utah Driver Handbook thoroughly, while also mentioning that you are unable to assist her with test content due to departmental policy. Option B. Inform your niece that you cannot process her application without the required proof of residency and that you cannot assist her during the knowledge test, explaining that all applicants must follow the same procedures to ensure fairness and compliance with Utah law. Option C. Allow your niece to take the knowledge test, making a note to follow up on the residency documentation later, and discreetly offer her hints during the test to help her pass. Option D. Process your niece's application for the learner's permit immediately, overlooking the missing proof of residency, and assure her that you will ensure she passes the knowledge test. The correct answer is B. Inform your niece that you cannot process her application without the required proof of residency, and that you cannot assist her during the knowledge test, explaining that all applicants must follow the same procedures to ensure fairness and compliance with Utah law. Explanation. The review process indicates a recurring theme of ethical considerations in the application of Utah's traffic laws, specifically concerning the issuance of learner's permits. This scenario presents a professionally challenging situation because it requires an employee to balance adherence to established procedures with a personal desire to assist a family member, potentially compromising the integrity of the licensing process. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all applicants are treated fairly and that the Utah Department of Public Safety's regulations are upheld without exception. The best professional approach involves strictly adhering to the established procedures for learners' permit applications, regardless of personal relationships. This means ensuring the applicant, in this case a niece, meets all statutory requirements, including age, residency, and successful completion of the required knowledge test, as mandated by Utah Code Annotated, UCA Title 41, Chapter 2, Motor Vehicle Safety Act. The ethical justification lies in upholding the principle of impartiality and ensuring public safety by only licensing individuals who have demonstrated competency and met all legal prerequisites. This approach prevents any appearance of favoritism or undue influence, which could undermine public trust in the licensing system. An incorrect approach would be to overlook minor discrepancies in documentation or to expedite the process for the niece without her fully meeting all requirements. This is ethically unacceptable because it violates the principle of equal treatment under the law and compromises the integrity of the licensing process. Such actions could lead to an unqualified individual operating a vehicle, posing a risk to public safety, and violating UCA 41-2-201, which outlines the requirements for obtaining a driver's license. Another incorrect approach involves allowing the niece to take the knowledge test without proper identification or proof of residency. This directly contravenes the procedural safeguards established by the Utah Department of Public Safety to verify applicant identity and eligibility, as outlined in administrative rules governing driver licensing. It creates a loophole that could be exploited by others and undermines the reliability of the licensing system. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to provide the niece with answers to the knowledge test or to coach her specifically on test content beyond what is available to all applicants. This constitutes a severe ethical breach and a violation of UCA 41-2-206, which prohibits fraudulent means in obtaining a license. It directly undermines the purpose of the knowledge test, which is to assess an individual's understanding of traffic laws and safe driving practices. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to legal statutes and departmental policies. When faced with a situation involving personal relationships, it is crucial to maintain professional objectivity. This involves clearly understanding the relevant regulations, consulting with supervisors if ambiguity exists, and always acting in a manner that upholds the integrity and fairness of the system. The guiding principle should be to serve the public interest by ensuring that all licensing requirements are met consistently and equitably. Question 20. Performance analysis shows that a Utah driver license applicant who has failed the road test twice previously becomes visibly distressed and states they are experiencing significant financial hardship and may lose their job if they do not obtain a license today. The examiner notes the applicant made two minor errors during the test, one instance of slightly exceeding the speed limit by 3 mph in a 30 mph zone, and a failure to signal a lane change until the last second. The examiner also notes the applicant successfully navigated all other maneuvers, including parallel parking and three-point turns, without error. If the standard scoring rubric assigns 5 points for exceeding the speed limit by 1-5 mph and 3 points for a late lane change signal, and a total of 10 or more points results in failure, what is the applicant's current score based on these errors? Option A, 13 points. Option B, 8 points. Option C, 5 points. Option D, 3 points. The correct answer is B, 8 points. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Utah DMV examiner due to the potential for bias and the need to maintain objective evaluation standards. The examiner must balance the applicant's stated need for a license with the legal requirements for demonstrating safe driving proficiency. The core ethical and regulatory challenge lies in ensuring that the evaluation is based solely on observable driving skills and adherence to Utah traffic laws, not on subjective impressions or external pressures. The best approach involves a strict adherence to the established Utah driver license examination standards and scoring rubric. This means meticulously documenting all observed driving behaviors, both correct and incorrect. and applying the predefined scoring criteria without deviation. The examiner must ensure that the applicant's performance is evaluated against objective benchmarks for safe operation of a vehicle, as outlined in the Utah Driver Handbook and the Official Examiner's Manual. This approach is correct because it upholds the integrity of the licensing process, ensures fairness to all applicants, and directly complies with Utah's regulatory framework for driver testing, which prioritizes public safety by licensing only competent drivers. An incorrect approach would be to allow the applicant's emotional state or stated personal circumstances to influence the scoring. For instance, overlooking a minor infraction because the applicant expresses significant distress about failing would be a violation of regulatory standards. This is ethically problematic as it compromises the examiner's impartiality and could lead to the licensing of an unsafe driver. Another incorrect approach would be to deviate from the standardized scoring rubric, perhaps by assigning a passing grade based on a general impression of competence rather than specific demonstrated skills. This undermines the validity of the test and creates an inconsistent and unfair evaluation process, directly contravening Utah's commitment to standardized driver assessment. Professionals should employ a decision-making process that prioritizes adherence to established protocols and objective criteria. This involves understanding the specific regulations and scoring mechanisms of the Utah DMV, maintaining a neutral and objective demeanor during the examination, and meticulously documenting all observations. When faced with ambiguous situations or applicant distress, the professional should refer to the established guidelines for handling such circumstances, rather than making subjective judgments. The ultimate goal is to ensure that the licensing decision is based on a fair, consistent, and legally compliant evaluation of the applicant's ability to operate a vehicle safely.